we're drawing inspiration from centralized AI discovery companies, but what we're really innovating here is in using decentralized token incentivized networks to really expedite step one and get there and be way more capital efficient than any of them can be. Like, to our knowledge, we are the first decentralized drug screening platform. And so we're really trying to push this new business model as well of merging crypto, AI, and pharma to really get over this crisis of drug development and medical advancement. The idea being that not everybody's necessarily bought into crypto in that space, and that's probably why they haven't tried merging the three fields together.
So basically, we provide the miners with well-benchmarked versions of predictors for affinity, and we also provide them with synthesizable chemical universes of molecules that we curate. So we know there is a high likelihood of those compounds being synthesized by the right partners. So the key task for miners here is to be navigating these chemical universes.
And I think that's the promise of like Bittensor as a whole, regardless of what kind of problem you're trying to tackle, right? It's like you can find alignment amongst all these different kinds of actors. Thus far, all like the metrics and like early indications that we're finding in our results are really promising. Kind of as Pedro was saying, is both in that we're seeing them getting increasingly better at looking at larger and larger chunks of the data set, and the fact that some of the submissions are very similar to things that we know work.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs Podcast. Today, we're joined by Micaela and Pedro from Metanova. We discussed their decentralized AI drug discovery on Subnet 68, targeting behavioral drugs to address lifestyle-related health issues. They curate synthesizable molecules, use benchmark models for miners to prioritize compounds, and partner with CROs to validate results, merging crypto, AI, and pharma. They offer insights on regulatory navigation, monetization, and incentivizing collaborative innovation. Now, back to Micaela and Pedro with the 55th Ventura Labs Podcast.
All right, Metanova, Micaela, Pedro, how are you guys doing today?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having us.
Really good.
I'm doing good. Good to have you guys here. So this journey of y'all's together started, I believe, in 2024 when you guys came together and started a drug discovery company. What was the origin story of that?
Well, I think there were many conversations with mutuals in between, but I think Pedro and I connected through people that were in the decentralized science space, and we instantly recognized that we had, shared interest for a new kind of approach to drug development that leveraged his experience with AI drug design, and also that took the opportunity of capitalizing on virtual biotech and truly decentralized science. Like, I'm originally from Peru, Pedro's from Brazil. And so we really recognized here that there was an opportunity to really revolutionize all of the structural failures of drug development, not just from how we think about what kind of drugs should be made and like what really constitutes like health and well-being, but also how can you optimize through like geographical arbitrage to really accelerate the timelines and cut through the red tape that I think has stymieing a lot of innovation in the space to date.
And then Pedro, what's your side of the story? How'd this start in your eyes?
I think Micaela covered pretty much how it happened and how it worked and how we aligned so deeply on the potential that we see here on using these transformative new tools to tackle those really hard problems that we're talking about here, that are truly in finding new drugs that are efficient and that can really work to impact people's lives in the long term.
And the niche you guys picked is behavioral drugs. Why did you guys decide to start here?
Right. We've started calling them behavioral drugs. At the beginning, it was just metaprogramming. to be fair, that's like a drug class. And really, it's a way to think about, what are the possibilities for medicine moving forward? I think, right now we have a very pathological centric view that's mostly driven by the way that we approach regulations and how drugs get approved. So it's like you approve a drug for a specific disease, and that's very reactionary. But I think what we've noticed and what the science is pointing to is that upstream from all of this is the way that you live your life has a huge impact on your health outcomes. And so we were trying to go upstream as a way of really identifying what is missing in people's lives to live them to the fullest and to prevent diseases, treat diseases, and really use it as a way to identify what kind of targets are most interesting to us. But then, as you follow that logic, right? So for example, if we follow the logic that lifestyle is a huge determinant of, morbidity and mortality, we realized that you can find a drug that helps you with caloric restriction and therefore has like a huge impact on a variety of different diseases. So it's a different way of thinking about how to approach the problem, not to go through the development process itself. Because when you go upstream, what you find is like it's related to a bunch of different kinds of disorders, whether it's like heart conditions or like neurodegenerative diseases. The way that we are conducting our day-to-day ultimately impacts, what is going to come thereafter. And so there's like an economic rationale for it as well, in that you end up finding, the point of intersection for a lot of different diseases. And therefore you're able to treat a lot more people, and therefore you even can build like an economic or like commercial proposal for why that kind of approach makes more sense.
And then your subnet architecture has miners searching for molecules and their affinity in binding towards specific proteins is what you guys score. Is that the correct view of what your miners do in your network?
So basically, we provide the miners with well-benchmarked versions of predictors for affinity. And we also provide them with synthesizable chemical universes of molecules that we curate. So we know there is a high likelihood of those compounds being synthesized by the right partners. So the key task for miners here is to be navigating these chemical universes and saying, oh, these regions of the chemical universe are the ones that should be prioritized to go under the predictions for the prediction models that we have benchmarked already prior to sharing with them. So it's truly a search problem, but we are, the way we crafted it here is about which molecules from this, billion-sized pool of molecules are the ones that one should be simulating prior to prioritizing and moving next.
So do miners do these simulations themselves, and you guys judge the validity of them?
So basically, they run the predictions using the benchmarked models that we are providing them. So we evaluate those models in a very deep way, statistically, to be sure that they are working well for the targets of interest. That is, for example, the reason for the constantly released fine-tuned models, because that way we do know that those models not only are well, are behaving well for the targets of interest, considering retrospective benchmarks that we do perform prior to releasing them. And yes, they do run those predictions. The thing is that it would not be the most efficient thing to just run the prediction for these whole chemical universes. In
So
that way, what is incentivized is clever algorithmic searches, so they can go through the chemical universes, the chemical spaces, and prioritize the molecules that should be going through this specific evaluation under the relevant under the specific model that we're providing them.
I think like overall, if you think about it, the thing to really, really get good at, or the thing that we're incentivizing them to do, and that we are trying to do as well, is get better at shortlisting molecules so that you have to test fewer of them, both in silico and then in the real world, right? Like they have billions of possibilities and they could be spending tons of compute running all of them to find what the right answer is. Or they can come up, as Pedro was saying, with these new search approaches that allow them to identify chunks that are going to be more promising, so that you don't waste your time looking at regions that aren't going to be relevant for the drug targets that we're asking them to focus on, if that makes sense.
And in search for these new molecules, is it all synthesizable, or is there theoretical molecules as well? Do you guys do both?
Yeah, so right now we are going for, they are theoretical but synthesizable, meaning there are approaches that are going to generate you molecules that you don't know if you're going to be able to get there at all. Right here, we are going through a path in which those compounds, even though they are theoretical, they are done in a way that is based on precursors that we know are available and on rules that we do know if you use them to combine the precursors, you have a very high likelihood of achieving the final compound. So it's what we call synthesizable compounds. They were never synthesized before, but you do know that you have a very, very high likelihood of achieving them. Just a big difference.
Always trying to make sure, I think one thing that we are trying to do that sets us apart is make sure that the submissions that we receive from the miners are actionable. Like we can actually get them synthesized in the lab and tested. What was really cool about one of our recent updates was this combinatorial data set that allowed us to still stick to that principle, that goal of ours, but also allow miners to like use generative approaches that are basically like mimicking what it would be like to synthesize molecules in a lab.
And then taking it to the next step, you find that molecule. Do you guys then have your own wet lab? Are you partnered with a wet lab? What does the next step look like?
We work with contract research organizations, is what they're called, CROs labs. And I'll let Pedro talk more about his pre-existing relationship with one of them, but what's really cool about that is that allows us to like really form a bridge with people that are not in crypto. Like, to our knowledge, we are the first decentralized drug screening platform. And so we're really trying to push this new business model as well of merging crypto, AI, and pharma to really get over this crisis of drug development and medical advancement. The idea being that not everybody's necessarily bought into crypto in that space, and that's probably why they haven't tried merging the three fields together. However, when we start working with a partner that all of the traditional players are used to working with, then our data, is elevated in ground truth. There's like an oracle predictor that we can all agree on, can then ground the results of our like crypto platform thus far.
Exactly. So currently, if you look at this virtual biotech concept that has been around for some time but was never plugged with the crypto world, you will see that it basically relies on using some kind of approach to propose new molecules that are going to be doing, biologically speaking, what you want them to do, and then having those compounds synthesized and tested by reliable providers of chemical synthesis and providers of biological assays. And the interesting thing is that those companies are not only used by virtual biotechs, they are the same companies the big pharmas are using to perform those assays. So this means the moment you have the specific results for specific compounds, you don't need to be like moving around to show that your data is valid. Your data is going to be valid because you're going to be using the same lab that very big companies are also using as service providers to benchmark and evaluate what you are creating.
And in terms of the monetization of this, is it you guys selling your data, or is it you kind of partner with these labs, and then if they develop a drug, you guys get royalties on it? How does that aspect look like?
We have a lot of options, which I think is almost confusing to some people, but actually really, really strategic when you're like navigating an environment where, like, I think I was on a revenue search and I try to remind people, like, there's a different process here in that you need to have an adaptive framework that allows you to respond to the data that you get, because the further you go down the drug development process, the more you're going to learn about it. And you need to have a goal in mind, but you also need to have ways to make the best of the information that becomes available, right? Like, you'll get better and better at guessing where you will end up. In terms of what we can monetize, we can both we can offer drug screening as a service, just as we are doing drug screening for ourselves. We can do that for a partner. That would follow a fairly traditional model that you see in other biotech and pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies in general like to look for early stage leads in startups. They don't usually do that themselves. We can do model training as a service, and we can sell the data that we get from the CROs. But really, truly, the holy grail, the thing that pays off the most, the thing that has, I think, no point of comparison with any other subnet, well, I shouldn't say that, most subnets, is the development of drug assets themselves, right? Like, that's the thing that has the biggest moat. That's the thing that has the biggest payout. That's where you see like a single deal that's like in the hundreds of millions of dollars, like can't even be in the total of billions, right? So what's really unique about what we have built is that as a platform, we're no longer betting on just developing one of those drugs. Like, we can become we're like creating an ever improving machine that can identify those drug assets and that can be used by other people to identify assets of their choice as well. So that really gives us maximum optionality, and I think the ability to really capitalize of any kind of moment in the market. We have our own thesis, as we were talking about earlier, on metaprogramming drugs, reprogramming body and mind, behavior as being kind of like upstream, and really allowing you to like develop drugs that have like population scale impacts and can be used to treat like a variety of indications or conditions at the same time. However, the way that we have designed our subnet, you don't need to have that same interest in order for Nova to be useful to you. Like, you can swap it for any target of your choice. Like, you can have a very narrow interest that has nothing to do with our own, and it will still be an ever improving machine that will allow you to get further along in this like quest for drug hunting. So that's good, because like we're not trying to just empower our own R&D, and the other thing to like really bear in mind is that we are also trying to solve for like translatability. So one thing that you might have noticed in our recently released fine-tuned models is that we're training them for both rat and human transporters, right? So we're building a platform that can help us run predictions for all kinds of targets, and that also closes the gap in predictability between the preclinical and clinical stage. Like, the way that you develop a drug, in our case, we're starting by identifying things with AI, and then you move into the lab and you have your cell lines, and then eventually you have animal models, and then eventually you have people, right? And what you see in this process is that the results that you get in each stage don't necessarily carry over to the next one. So in our platform, we're trying to close that gap from the very beginning and thinking already about how this like applies both to the animal models that will be used prior to these drugs being tested in humans.
Is there a way to vertically integrate that full stack into what you guys do, to where you go from the drug discovery to the lab to the animal testing to the human testing?
So we can be involved across that whole vertical. It just makes the most sense for us to outsource certain tasks. And that also gets at some of that arbitrage opportunities that we were talking about that I think can really accelerate our timelines and dramatically cut our costs. This has been an underexplored field, and a lot of this is really a product of how businesses have been structured. And if you look at like biotech venture landscape right now, it's like really concentrated in certain cities, particularly in the US, definitely in the Northern Hemisphere. And there's a lot of opportunities that are being left off the table. But that's really the promise of like decentralization and the kind of things that you can capitalize on when you like layer crypto, amongst other things. That's why Pedro and I were connected through the DeSci circles, because I think there is this interest and this hope of really leveraging heterogeneous opportunities. You might have a concentration of capital here, but you might have like talent actually disseminated all across the world. Like in the case of our subnet, like I don't actually know the full geographic breakdown of our miners, but they are from all over. And we have instant access to them. We don't have to go through the hiring process. Like there's a huge efficiency in us just being able to like tap into a network that not only provides us with cost neutral compute, but also like increasingly competitive labor, right? No LinkedIn, nothing, just results, proof of work.
Yeah, the global talent pool is a pro a lot of subnets point to. Could the fact that this is decentralized help you get around some of the regulation in certain countries?
Well, we still look at the FDA as the most interesting or most important regulatory body to approve our drugs. However, there are some interesting partnerships between the FDA and their like analogs in different countries that allow you to, for example, run clinical trials at a fraction of the cost in a different country, or to be doing, like these CROs, they're not necessarily located in the US. Some of their locations might be. But we live in a globalized world, and I think biotech hasn't totally caught on to the advantages of really decentralizing the development process itself, right? And there's a lot of overhead. Like there's still this idea that you need to have an office in SF or Boston so that you can raise money, and like that costs tons, and it doesn't really get you to discovering that drug faster, in my opinion. Like, I mean, there are some intangible benefits that we can't really measure, but the reality is like developing a drug is on average, costing like $2.6 billion. I think we need to be dramatic in the way that we cut our costs. And that needs to be reflected in the way that you structure your business model. And decentralization to me seems like the most obvious answer.
And which part of the stack takes the most time in terms of this drug development? Is it just finding the right molecule to use?
No, the path is like for sure long. You have relevant steps after you find the first molecule. You have relevant steps validating that this molecule is truly the right one, or are there very close, chemically speaking, analog molecules that would be better for what you want, not only considering it is going to be potent, but also is it going to reach the part in the body that you want it to reach? Is it going to be stable in the body? Is it going to be toxic, or is it going to be too toxic? Then how does this translate in terms of cell line models, in some cases organoid models, then animal models, human trials? So all of those steps are really relevant, but we're talking about cascading consequences here. So the most information one can aggregate in the initial steps to take decision, the higher the likelihood of better decisions in terms of optimizing for the resources that are being allocated in this kind of endeavor.
Right. And I think one thing that maybe isn't clear, and when we talk about our monetization, is like we can pass the baton at any stage, right? But I think for us, what was really important is to make step one the most efficient step possible, and also to chart a path that takes us all to market. And so we're drawing inspiration from companies, for example, like Loyal Biotech, that are doing something that's really clever, I think, and is following this dog to human pipeline, in that you first seek drug approval for pets, and then you leverage those sales and animal model data to then go for human drug approval, which is particularly interesting in like the longevity field, where it just takes time to really know if things work out. So we're drawing inspiration from them. We're drawing inspiration from centralized AI discovery companies, but what we're really innovating here is in using decentralized token incentivized networks to really expedite step one and get there and be way more capital efficient than any of them can be. I think they're making huge advances in the field, and what we aim to do is to also innovate in how you overcome the structural limitations of drug development, because what we're seeing is that it's not necessarily a lack of science. It's poor incentives and horrible costs for no real reason that we could definitely be cutting and still like be working towards this goal.
The pets to humans, how does that work? Is that why is that significant?
Oh, it's significant because you can get a drug approved way faster, and you can reach consumers directly. So usually like an early stage startup is limited to finding licensing deals and opportunities with larger companies that can like take it through the later stages of development. But what we're talking about is way faster, way cheaper, way easier to prove, and still, again, going for the holy grail of getting drugs approved for humans themselves. And well, personally, like I'm a huge dog lover, so like if I can like really support the health and well-being of dogs and humans, that'll be like a big plus for me.
And then you guys have a focus on behavioral drugs. How do you decide exactly what your targets are going to be?
Well, so our first set of targets we're really interested in what are reward and learning mechanisms. So you can see that there would be parallels in the kinds of drugs that you would be developing for dogs and humans as well, right? If you think about it, currently most pet medications were developed for humans, and then after the fact, they noticed that they could be used for dogs as well. But like to give you a sense, the pet calming medication industry around the world is valued at $8 billion. So itself, it is a huge market to tackle that has, translatability to then another gigantic multi-billion-dollar market in the human medication space as well.
Right. And I think the target selection thing is always in the industry seen as part science and part art, because it truly involves understanding how safe you are that this specific target is truly linked to the condition you're going for, how much evidence you have in terms of models that were tested considering basic science, genetic evidence, chemical probes. So there are many factors that one usually consider when doing this kind of selection.
What are those factors to determine if you have the right target to start?
Those that I just said are relevant targets, but usually we're going to be, one of the key ones is to understand if you have genetic validation for this target in terms of association with the condition. So for example, in people that bear specific mutations on this target, are those associated with clinical conditions? Does this correlate with a potential way that you could use to modulate this target in a way that could be useful to like restore what would be the level of activity that you are expecting more? In other cases, this correlation is not going to be like that direct, but you're going to have a lot of potential biomarkers that you're going to be looking for to take this kind of decision. Of course, you also want to consider in the real world not only the science, but what is the interest in around the world in terms of like the academic laboratories and in terms of the big pharma companies on like going these specific biological pathways to modulate this condition or disease. So you usually consider the science as a very important example, genetic association, but there are many more biomarkers that you should be considering when doing this kind of thing. Market interest on the specific pathway that you're talking about. And from that, do you have the right models to really develop this until the end? So is this really going to be efficient when doing the translation? In some cases, you might have like an amazing target, but you're not going to have the right animal models to show that it is that your drug is doing what it should do and that it is safe, because the target is too different in the animal model. So all of those variables are usually considered with a lot of care prior to picking a target. But it is not like there is one book that every company follows on how to do that. Indeed, many companies, they don't even talk about their targets. They keep it confidential because of how much of a mix between science and art this is.
And the business case, of course, right? Which is a prediction in and of itself and like a moving target. Like, will it pay off at the end of the day? And so people care, like, will insurance companies be willing to cover for this? Or, you know, in the case of some of these drugs, are people even going to pay for them out of pocket? And I think that's, while we approached, you know, our interest in like meta programming, you know, out of a, you know, deep appreciation of different ways to really heal yourself and to improve like life quality and prevent diseases, and like seeing like, you know, some pretty evidence-backed associations with life extension. We also realized that there's an economic case for this, as I was saying earlier. And that's an important thing when you're trying to develop something that ultimately will cost a lot of money. And also a reason for you to build a platform that allows you to leverage a bunch of different targets, right? Like, we're not restricted to one group. That's something that a lot of biotech companies haven't been able to do in the last few years. I think about a few weeks ago, we saw the return of what they called like the platform valuation premium. There was this deal that was significantly higher than recent quarters because of the fact that that company was utilizing a platform, and the buyer was recognizing that they were also gaining access to the fact that they were going to be able to like develop other assets through that platform. And so that specific asset itself became a signal for the promise of all the others that they could create, if that makes sense.
In terms of end products, is a drug like Ozempic something that has this kind of downstream effect for weight loss? Is that a good representation of something you're trying to do?
Well, Ozempic is different, but I think it does it does show this arc of tackling, through different mechanisms of action. I think, again, we're talking about this like very conceptually, but through different mechanisms of action, if your goal is to really help people regulate, or if the drug, as an effect, helps people regulate key behaviors such as eating, sleeping, focusing, connecting with other individuals, you will find more and more that they are helpful for a variety of conditions. So that's why, for example, some of the other like GLP-1 agonists have been, known to really reduce inflammation, which wasn't necessarily the thing that they were first developed to do, or have like neuroprotective effects, right? These are all like still under investigation, but we're seeing that the scope of their effect is much broader than what was originally intended.
And I'm assuming that's the art piece you guys are referencing. Like if you go upstream, you could have these broader, not consequences, but
Right.
positive externalities.
Right. Like for example, like we were one of our targets featured in our challenges was serotonin, and as we were asking our miners to identify molecules that bound to serotonin, new research came out identifying that that could be a target of interest in developing new immunotherapy for cancer, which is not
Absolutely.
something that you think about at all. Like usually you think about serotonin exclusively in relation to depression, but you do know that depression is associated to lower life expectancy, right? And so I think there's just like a lot of relationships between that we don't truly understand, and that's, I think, the more reason to go upstream of just diabetes or just Alzheimer's, because you will find kind of what are the forks in the road.
In that case, specifically, the serotonin transporter was like very, very recent studies are like pointing this super interesting link between its modulation of the tumoral microenvironment, which talks a lot with this new field that is intensely growing, that is like the neuroimmune axis, that again reinforces all that we're discussing here. There are many paths and biological substrates that are not still fully understood by us, but link how behaviors and how the way we live impact biology in a more micro and mechanistic level.
Right. We might not know how it works in all the cases. I think it's very exciting to see this research being published, like as we're working on this problem. But I think we will find more and more explanations of how this works. But there are reasons why, we're seeing these relationships. And it just like on a first principles perspective should make sense that helping people live a healthy, regulated life, will have profound effects. And also that we should place a premium on what their life experience is today. Like, I think we have a pretty puritanical view on medicine where it's like you need to wait till you're like wriggling in pain in the ER for somebody to like prescribe something to you. And we say that it's because like we're not trying to like, create addictive drugs, but then we like prescribe meth to children. Like, I don't know. I don't think we're making a lot of sense when it comes to like how we approach like the healing field in general. And I think some things have been stigmatized without any real reason. And we're finding, for example, that there are interesting drug targets that can help like boost cognition. And maybe this is something that we want to be exploring more and more, and that isn't like frivolous and is still like worthy of our research and development. And I think that's the freedom that we get by using a network like Bittensor to really like bootstrap our R&D and really involve like the community and being like, is it, do you want to support this new approach for like medicine and healing? Because like you can simply by staking, by mining, by validating, like you actually can be a part of a new wave of biomedical advancement that doesn't need to even choose how to treat people, but opens up more opportunities and gives more people the opportunity of like investigating their own R&D thesis and vision through our platform.
And you think the field is shifting to more preventative types of medicine than reactive types of medicine?
I don't think it's shifting. The thing is, you have, just like we were going upstream, if you think about drugs being approved for a disease, right? So from like the investor's perspective, they're running numbers on, is it worth it for us to like invest in the development of this drug based on this disease? This disease has like this like certain amount of people that are like diagnosed with it a year and can therefore be like our addressable market. Like they're looking at it from a numbers perspective, and usually they're only really jumping on or like pretty late in the game, like on the clinical trial or like late, just preclinical clinical trial. And I think what that does is you might be missing some opportunities about thinking about new approaches of what is really needed holistically when it comes to treating people down the road. Like you can pair it to the condition. You will find the connection. In fact, I think you're more likely to find more connections, more markets, more economic opportunities and incentives and rationales for the development of the drugs that you're looking for if you go back to the first principles of what is healthy living.
In terms of going upstream, is the furthest you can go upstream genetic editing?
Genetic editing would be a way to go. And in some cases, it will be a really good way to go for sure. But it is not going to be the only way to go. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, for sure. In some cases, you're not... this works really well, for example, when you have conditions or diseases that are being caused by one mutation, one very specific mutation that is causing, again, our loss of function in that case, and then you go for genetic editing. But in many cases, especially when you're talking about psychiatric conditions or neurological conditions, that is not going to be the case. They are not going to be monogenic. They are going to be polygenic, meaning you have an influence of differences, specific differences on the a lot of pieces of the genetic background of the individual, plus their experiences with the world until that point in time. So for very specific indirect interventions, this is for sure going to be really important. But in many cases, you can't just narrow to like, oh, if I just change this gene, I'm going to solve this problem. It is much more complex, meaning you need to go to modulating the system in a broader way. Even, for example, with drugs that are going to be bearing a relevant kind of polypharmacology, or they're going to be impacting the effect of multiple targets at the same time. And small molecules are much more well suited to do that currently than genetic editing.
I think, I think we bring a more pragmatic perspective to the space. I'm going to attribute it to our South American background, in fact. And I think that's why I'm actually bullish on us, because we're like crazy enough to be doing this in crypto, but we're actually pragmatic enough that we want this to work, and we want this to work at scale. Most visionaries right now, they're advancing like crazy technology, like brain-computer interfaces. And I think that is amazing and super exciting. But the reality is, who's going to have access to that? How many people are actually going to have access to that over the next decade or two? Like the reality is that right now, our manufacturing and distribution systems are perfected for small molecule drugs, which means if you want to help treat the majority of the world, or if you want to have the possibility of accessing those kinds of numbers, then it's in the small molecule realm. Like really what you might want to be innovating in is how you identify new small molecules, how you think about what kind of treatments should be available, like how you design your business, how you cut costs, how you navigate, this nightmare that is like current like red tape for regulatory approvals that has greatly improved in the US with the last administration or with the current administration. But what I mean to say is a lot of people just kind of like kick the board and they're like, let's start from scratch. And I think that's great. I think everybody needs to be trying in their own way. But I think the approach that we bring is a little bit more pragmatic. And it's like, how can we make the best of the existing system that we have in front of us and innovate on top of it, if that makes sense?
So based off my understanding, it's more you want to take the current means of distribution and optimize that instead of trying to build these new technologies that are still who knows how far off.
I think there are two things. I think there's also the fact that even though for some cases those very new technologies are going to be the way to go, there is just not enough evidence or not enough clarity on how they could be the way to go in cases in which your problem or the condition or the change that you want to induce is not linked to one pathological variant in a gene. If that is not the case, then going directly with, like, for example, genetic editing is not going to cut it.
I guess to play devil's advocate in a way, in genetic editing, if you could personalize the gene editing to each person, in theory, couldn't that work?
So in that case, it would be, if you're talking about like really editing, first, I don't think we are like close to be able to do that in like many years to come, many years to come. And second, there is one thing. In many cases, you have a drug that is approved, and for some reason, you get side effects. You want to be able to say, stop that. You cannot do that after you edit the genome of people, but you can do that with small molecules. So it is kind of like very recently, some new therapies for a specific kind of blood cancer that were based on using genetically edited cells. They were withdrawn from the market because of relevant consequences from the therapies that were not, even clearly predictable. So we're talking about a realm that is like, after it is done, very likely one could say, wow, but you could have the perfect scissor that can just edit how many times you want. But biologically, usually it's not like that. You're going to have a limit on how many times you can be like changing this specific gene. So I would say, even though at first it might look cleaner, it might have very relevant consequences that we don't know. And the moment we know, there's nothing really that you can do.
Right. Which is why it's not our bet. And like, please, other people advance that, like everybody tackle these problems. Like we need to be moving fast. I also think there's a lot of room for us to grow within the realm of precision health and medicine and thinking about small molecules in relation to like people's like specific like genetic profiles. So there's a lot of room for improvement. I think we're just trying to move fast, I think be bold, but also pragmatic and really leverage this unique opportunity that we have with Bittensor to advance the AI piece of the drug discovery process that can be useful to lots of different companies, not just our own, and ultimately impact the lives of people that aren't just in these like select communities that will have access to like neural links and genetic editing, etc., which I think is something that you need to do when you're looking at long development timelines. I think you want to maximize for that impact for sure.
How far off do you think are those type of technologies in terms of Neuralink and things of that kind?
I hear a lot of conflicting opinions by experts. I would not call myself an expert on that at all. I think they're really cool. You know, I think they're um I think how close are we for them to be like adopted by consumers is like a completely different question.
And then Pedro's point of there's too many unknowns, essentially. It's not been tested enough. You don't know the side effects.
I think most of those things are still pretty much in the very basic science realm, even though like there's a lot of excitement and everyone wanted to work. I also wanted to work. We're still a lot in the basic steps of that. While when we're talking about small molecules, you kind of know what are the steps that you should be doing in order to get there and to evaluate safety and activity. In those cases, you kind of don't know. And so I think we're going to get there for sure. Like for sure. And for many, many cases, they are going to be the best thing, but not for all. Even when we're there, even when all of those things are available, I still think that you will have specific kinds of biological modulation that will be more well suited by drugs that are going to have a curve in which they are in your system and then they are not anymore, that are not there permanently. I think this is also a feature. So we want to have everything. Like I'm really I'm really excited by the possibilities, because those things are truly complementary to each other. While some modalities might not able to reach one kind of need, another will be.
Yeah. And the timelines here are a bit cloudy, right? But what do you think is the timeline that you guys can reach that holy grail and have a discovery that leads to a drug being produced?
I would be lying to you if I gave you an exact timeline, but I think that there are many milestones in between that will be really, really exciting for us. And that's kind of how the industry works. The industry works in relation to milestones that give you greater and greater certainty that you're working towards that holy grail. And I think also because of the fact that we can do this in partnership with other groups, it means that it might not be just one holy grail. It could be 10. It's just like our role in each one of them might look different. In one of them, we might just hand it over. In another one, we might continue developing it together. In a different one, we might contribute by having somebody access, libraries of top compounds that then they work on entirely on their own. Like there are many ways to structure these deals and to work with other players in the space. For us, what's really important right now is to get some of these compounds synthesized and tested by the CROs that we were talking about to like officially begin this bridge with the traditional sector so that we can demystify, our results, and really start kind of parlaying to an industry that has had a lot of skepticism about crypto up until now, but I think is going to be really floored when they look at the capital efficiency of our screening approach.
And those milestones, I'm assuming, is just how far you get down the funnel of the drug development.
Yeah, each test.
And then just one last question here is, well, actually, not yet. I got one more beside that. What is the most exciting thing you guys have seen from miners? What have you been most excited with or pleased with by miners so far?
I think there were a few very interesting things that we found from miners. First, that they can find the shortest path very quickly. So if there are any holes in the model, they are going to find it really, 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 really quickly, which is actually pretty good because it can be patched up very efficiently. But more than that, the fact that for specific targets, they were finding not only molecules that were presenting a very high level of chemical diversity and the predicted affinities that we wanted, but also molecules that were pretty close to non-binders of the target. So meaning they were really, really exploring the space in a very efficient way, or in the way that we really want them to be.
Right. I think it's like everybody talks about it as the swarm, right? And it's being able to like coordinate these things together, being able to like find alignment, is a really exciting moment. There we don't need to agree, but we can work towards a common goal. Like we can design incentives in a way that allows us to work in the right direction. And I think that's the promise of like Bittensor as a whole, regardless of what kind of problem you're trying to tackle, right? It's like you can find alignment amongst all these different kinds of actors. Thus far, all like the metrics and like early indications that we're finding in our results are really promising. Kind of as Pedro was saying, is both in that we're seeing them getting increasingly better at looking at larger and larger chunks of the data set, and the fact that some of the submissions are very similar to things that we know work. So we know that we're finding entirely new things. We're going for new places that nobody has ever gone to before. And at the very least, some of them are very similar to what we know works, which is usually what people just do by default when they're like trying to discover a new drug. They just start by looking at what works and they tweak it a little bit. We're allowed to cover all three bases with the platform right now.
Getting a working incentive mechanism means a lot more than people think. So that being said, what advice? This is the last question I have for you guys. What advice do you have for people in Bittensor trying to apply Bittensor to a new medium, a new sector, like you guys did with biotech here and drug discovery?
Well, I think my main one is definitely do something cool and new, because like you get to do so. Like you get the opportunity to like tackle any kind of problem in the world, and bootstrap a business and really like crowdsource funding for your dreams. Like financing overall can take a lot of different ways, but I think I would encourage people to be bold. I would encourage people to look for problems that benefit from a decentralized strategy. So for example, in our case, we're benefiting from the fact that our miners are contributing compute, but also just finding the shortest path to the reward, right? And therefore poking holes at our models that everybody else just publishes in a way to make them look nice and pretty and prop up the valuations of their companies. Like there is this transparency and this really great opportunity to balance both like fierce competition and cooperation by doing these kinds of things on chain.
Yeah, I would only also add that miners are truly exceptional. So I think be sure that you're bringing them the most exciting and hard problems to go for, because they're going to ask for it for sure.
All
They'll
right.
be ready to be challenged nonstop. They're the brightest minds. They're
Well-
like, make it harder. We're like, "Oh, okay."
That's right. That's right. Well, Pedro, Micaela, pleasure having you guys on. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Grant.